Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I want to thank our underwriter, audiobooks.com, where your first book is free. The cool thing about audiobooks.com is that it's a streaming device or a streaming service where if you're listening to your book on your smartphone, let's say in the car, and then you leave the car, go in the house, and later you want to pick up the story on your tablet, it simply picks up where you left off. It's a seamless transfer. That's why they call it Netflix for books. Audiobooks.com, they have 40,000 titles, so you better get listening. Our book for today is US Marshals, Inside America's Most Storied Law Enforcement Agency. This book is written by Mike Earp and co-author David Fisher. And one of the things interesting is Mr. Earp is a descendant of another very famous U.S. Marshal, Wyatt Earp. Mr. Earp, welcome. How are you this morning?
Bill, I'm doing well, and thank you for having me on.
Great to have you on. I tell you, this book is doing very well. I looked on Amazon this morning. It's the number one book in law enforcement, so you can say you're number one.
Well, that's good. Thank you, Bill. Glad to hear it.
Now, I wondered, the first question I want to ask is, your ancestor, Wyatt Earp, how do you think he would fare in today's U.S. Marshals Service?
Well, I think, number one, he'd find it very, very different. For all practical purposes, we have put our horses in the corral, and we're now in SUVs and high-performance vehicles. But I think, there's still a sense of what Deputy U.S. Marshals do today is standard to back then, in that you got to use common sense, your intuition, your safety skills, and all of that. And that's just part of being a marshal, and was back then, and it is today.
But I think the same spirit is certainly alive, because he had this dogged determination to hunt down bad guys. And from your book, it seems that that's the number one the number one ambition of most U.S. Marshals, to get out from behind the desk and chase bad guys.
Absolutely, and as we state in the book, I think that came about at the end of the Vietnam era, when the veterans joined into the Marshal Service, and they did not just, as you say, sit behind a desk or sit in a courtroom or transport prisoners. They wanted action. They wanted to be involved. And so the book is basically a little over 30-plus years of what occurred from the late 70s, early 80s until today. And the result are, nationwide violent fugitive task forces throughout the country that are run by the Marshal Service. And every one of them are, just as you said, a dogged determination to put the bad guy, to find them, to hunt them down, and put them in jail. Absolutely.
And in the sleeve of the book here, it says that just in 2012, this astonished me, there were 123,000 fugitives caught.
Correct. Throughout the task forces throughout the country, that year they arrested over 123,000, and Bill, that's 10,000 a month.
I know. That's a small city.
Staggering.
Well, actually, not a small city. It's a good-sized city.
Exactly, and it's of those, 4,000 were murderers, 15,000 were sex offenders. So, at least and which is why most of the marshals and their task force officers do it, is that you put them in jail. You're eliminating, who knows how many additional crimes you're eliminating, how many victims you're saving, but you put those in jail, and they're not preying on the public anymore.
Well, and there was a lot of murderers in that.
Over 4,000, yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Now, other thing that surprised me here was over and over again in the book, I get these little statements from U.S. Marshals that would say, when it comes to tracking down criminals, we're the best. When it comes to technological tracking, we're the best. And hunting down the fugitives didn't surprise me terribly, because that's been a function a long time. But the technological tracking, I would think that the CIA would be the best at that.
Well, but you got to remember, CIA cannot operate inside the United States. So, and they're intelligence driven, and they've got their mission. Ours is focused differently. all of our technology and electronic surveillance measures. You know, you have to have court orders. You got to have the judicial review to do it. But we've got some of the most sophisticated tracking equipment in the country. Ours is to, manhunt, is to track down. But for all the information and intelligence that you get, you still have to analyze it and identify, such as, a lot of our fugitives that are on the run are trying to stay off the grid.
Yes.
So they will, in one day, they'll use 7 different cell phones so that you can't track them. But you eventually get to where you can identify and analyze and figure out, who they are and where they are. And at the time, we just have to do it in a real high-speed fashion so that they, A, won't flee the country, and B, they don't prey on, and kill somebody else or abduct a child or things like that. And just over the time, we've evolved to where it's a routine thing. We're very, very good at it, and that's why you arrest 123,000 of them a year.
Well, let me just give you a scenario. Let's suppose I was a bad guy and just all of a sudden became a bad guy, and I went off grid, I disappeared, and local authorities can't find me, and they went to the US Marshals Service, so we need you to find this guy. Well, where would you start?
We would start with where you were last. And while we're looking at that and what you were doing at that time, we're going to also basically resurrect your life. We're going to find out everybody you're associated with, all your family members. Have you ever been in jail? Who were your cellmates? Who were your visitors? We'll find out everything about you. We're going to look at all your finances. We're going to look at your communication devices, be it cell phones, be it internet, whatever you got. We're going to figure out what you had and see if we can't find you through that. So we're not going to, no stones get unturned, and we're going to look. Sometimes we can catch it quickly. Most fugitives are going to communicate with somebody. They're going to need a financial source to keep them on the run. They're either going to commit additional crimes, which they're going to pop up and, all of a sudden they're robbing banks or they're strong-arming people, things like that. Or if they're drug dealers, they're going to continue their enterprise, but they're going to do it from somewhere else, and we got to connect that. So we're going to look at who you're contacting and what your financial means are. And that's generally one of those two are going to lead us to you.
One of the stories you tell in the book, or that one of your agents tells, is about a guy they were looking for, and then they realized that he had never been outside of this small neighborhood, 4 or 5 square miles. In his life, he had always been there, and even though he was free to go anywhere, they figured most likely he's going to be there. And so that's always a tendency.
There's some, Bill, that are homebound, and they stay within their own environment, and they know nothing else. And that one, sometimes we look too far afield. We look downrange way too far. And sometimes you just got to pull it back in. When we do escape cases, and we're responsible for all the, federal escapes, and most of the state and local escapes are referred to us too, we tell them, start right there at that facility. Start at that institution. Don't go downrange yet. Start there. Work your way out and do it in increments. It's like dropping a pebble in a lake and expand out as you need to. Don't jump out there too far, because a lot of times you can find them. A lot of escapees you can find really, really close to the institution.
Tell the story about the one-legged man. That was a wonderful story about a guy who escaped even though he's on one leg.
Correct. It was a case out of Los Angeles, and we have a regional task force, fugitive task force out there, and they were trying to locate this guy. He was a cyber crime. He was breaking into all kind of, DOD and all kind of federal agencies, and then he was also getting into banks and stealing money. So he had already been arrested. Then he decided to cooperate. I believe it was with the FBI. He was going to cooperate with them and assist, but then he went off the grid again. And he's on the lam. And so eventually the marshals and the task force in Los Angeles get wind to where he's located and that he's going to be in an apartment complex, and I think it was like 4 stories up, apartment complex, and he's in that apartment. So they're going to do a raid on it. As they go in, and normally we cover front, back, sides, everything. Mm-hmm. We got a one-legged guy. He's on the 4th floor. They don't put anybody on the back because he's on the 4th floor. So they go in, break down the door, and he's in the back bedroom. They see him. Now, when you're going to go into a house, you're not just going to run straight for the guy.
Right.
You've got to clear your way through as you go, each room, because there can be people in there that are going to shoot you.
Sure.
So as they're methodically going into the back, they see him throw his leg out, and then he dives out the window, and they go, oh, my gosh, he's done a header. Well, they go out, and they rush to the window. They look down, and there's a big tree that he had actually jumped out on, and he is shimmying down the tree, gets to the bottom, puts on his leg, and he goes running off. And the lead deputy on the case goes, my God, can you believe that? That was incredible. And some of the other ones go, hey, let's call LAPD, get the helicopter up. And they go, heck no, man, that's a great story. We'll catch him another day. Let's go tell that story. And it's just one of the ones that, do occur. So. And interesting with that one, Bill, mm-hmm. I was watching, there's a movie depicting a US Marshal called Justified. Mm-hmm. I was watching it, 3 weeks ago, and they actually had that same scenario on mm-hmm. that show.
Well, those writers, they get a lot from real police work, right?
Correct, and a lot like movies like that or mm-hmm. TV shows like that. We'll have deputy marshals being technical advisors, retired mm-hmm. deputy marshals being technical advisors. So that's probably where they got it.
Well, while we're on that, Justified and fictional U.S. Marshals, I guess the most famous fictional marshal was Marshal Dillon, I suppose, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't remember how many years he was on, but at one time that was the longest-running series.
Yeah, 25 years.
Oh, there you go.
25 years I was on, and I've seen every episode.
Is that right?
Yes.
I grew up with it, so I definitely saw my share.
I didn't see them necessarily while they were running live, but, later, like on TV, they have the Western Channel, and they run them constantly. So I believe I've seen most every one.
I think about, I know for a fact, I think it was 25, it might have been 20 years ago, we were doing an anniversary of the Marshals Service, and I actually met James Arnett. Oh. He came to our headquarters. Yeah, big man.
He's tall. He's like 6'6", I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And he probably more than anybody else benefited from the mystique of the U.S. Marshals. It helped him in his career, certainly. But then if we go back to your relative, Wyatt, he, I suppose, through Western novels and writings about him, he probably brought it to real national prominence.
Yeah, I believe so. There was so much written on him, and mm-hmm. as I look at different things, and there's a lot of people that dispute a lot of the stories, and uh-huh. they write a book about that, and then there's mm-hmm. others that say, no, this was accurate. So there's a whole lot out there. There's no doubt on all the herbs. Wasn't
there a gun sold recently that
got like $250,000 claiming to be his bloodline special? And then I think I had heard that they don't know how to authenticate it. Uh-huh. So I'm not exactly sure how that ended.
Well, I don't know how you would authenticate it.
Exactly. So.
Well, another thing that comes up in the book that I found really fun was said when you're looking for a person, if you'll find their girlfriend and follow them, they will lead you to them. And if you can't find the girlfriend, get an ex-girlfriend, and they will take you to them.
There is no doubt, and that's exactly true. There's going to be a relationship somewhere, and you find that, and follow them. Maybe we can't find the mm-hmm. guy we're looking for, but we find his, girlfriend or girlfriends and start on them. And then, like you said, you find an ex-wife or an ex-girlfriend. They're ready to get them up. And some of our fugitive cases, through the years have been put on shows like America's Most Wanted mm-hmm. and things like that. You cannot believe how many leads we get on a case that has nothing to do with our fugitive, but somebody calls in to say there's dope in your fugitive is here, and gives you an apartment. And once you end up getting there and finding out, well, the guy's a drug dealer, and so you got to arrest him for being drugs. But he was turned in by his ex-girlfriend who was just mad at him. So she calls the show to give him up. So there's all kind of crazy things you got to eliminate it, but we try to put down who's the closest associates, who's the last known, and follow them around.
What is the best time of day to go after a fugitive, to go get them?
Early in the morning. We generally are, outside the front door around 4 a.m., 3:30, 4 a.m. Try to get there no later than 5. You want it still to be dark. You hope they're, sound asleep. You hope they stayed up late or went out. You hope they're, in a deep sleep at that point in time, because most of the ones we chase are armed and dangerous, and they've avowed not to go back to jail or prison, and so you want the element of surprise on your side. You want superior numbers, and you want superior firepower if it's necessary.
Well, I think it's a story about the one-legged man who they eventually did catch up with, and he was, cyber expert, and the story goes that the agent finally knew where he was, and he even sent him a message on his message board and said, "We're coming for you." And then within 24 hours had him.
Correct. I mean, we have, I've been, and several others, we've been taunted by fugitives. You don't catch them all in a week. You don't catch them all in a day. You don't catch them all in months. But you may be there chasing them for years. And so you are constantly going back to the families and their friends, checking on them, and you're turning up the heat and stuff. Well, I've had, as several others, and some stories in the book, had the fugitives actually taunt you and say, you're not going to catch me, you can't catch me, that kind of stuff. And that's what happened on that case, is that he actually put out that, I think it said this big-butted, fat deputy U.S. Marshal can't catch me. So the night before he was going to make the arrest, he sent him a message and says, "I'm coming, and I'm going to get you," and he did.
And then sometimes, like in that case, I believe it was that case where after the guy went to prison and was out, and they'd run into him, and they were kind of friendly with each other.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, you're going to lock him up. He's doing federal time. He's going to come through the marshal's office in that district numerous times for the next year or so, and you're going to run across him. Hey, by then, it's all over. There's nothing else to say. He's behind. You did your job. He's behind you. So, why not be decent about it if they want to?
Oh, and another thing that I learned here is all the cases where you're simply transferring people from city jail to federal prison. And tell the story about that the agent had to tell about Gotti, because that was really amazing and fun.
Yeah, they were in New York, and Gotti gets arrested, and Gotti gets convicted. And so back and forth every day, they see each other, because he's transporting them to courtroom and back into the cell block. And so they get to where they, at least recognize each other, talk a little bit, etc. Well, then it gets time that John Gotti is going to he's been sentenced to basically life in prison.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, he's done. And so they're taking him out to the plane I believe he went to Marion, Illinois penitentiary. And so the deputy's taking him out to the plane, and he notices that John is like shaking. He's very nervous, and he's like, wow, this guy's like stone cold, and why is it this? And so anyway, he turns as he's getting ready to get onto the plane. He's shackled, handcuffs, leg irons, etc. He turns to him, the deputy, after 6 months and going to court. He turns to him and he says, "Do you think it's too late for me to say I'm sorry?" And so they have a chuckle, but then he's still shaking. And so the deputy finds out later from the deputies on the plane that flew him to Illinois that he was absolutely petrified of flying. He wasn't scared of jail; he was scared of flying. So anyway,
so it was flying that ruined the poise of the Dapper Don.
Exactly. There he is, all cool and collected for everything else and all the people that had been whacked but scared of flying.
Well, there's a lot of good stories there about just transportation, about how, sometimes people, they have to put 3 prisoners in the back seat who don't get along and have to take them 800 miles. And
that's how we started way back. And when I first started in the early 80s and actually late 70s as a special deputy, we transport them all over the country. You had your own car, and you put them in the back. And there's a lot of stories. There's a lot of humor. There's a lot of fights. A lot of things that went on. Today, they don't do that. They contract out with different companies, and they transport the prisoners. We still have a prisoner transportation system, which flies and buses and stuff, but there's not that many more that are deputies putting them in the back as opposed to it used to. But what we're trying to do in the book is show how much we've changed in the last 30 years. When you talk about technology, I know one of the deputies said, well, back in the early 80s, technology consisted of a road map, a phone book, and a roll of dimes to use at the payphone. And, so you got stories from there to what we're using today to hunt these people down.
Well, you guys are the ones who invented the freebie scam to bring in the fugitives, right?
Correct. It was, the greed factor amongst these people. They're criminals. They're not going to go out and have a law-abiding job to, employ themselves or make money or support. It's all about greed. And so I think the biggest one we ever did was in the early 80s when the Washington Redskins had gone to either back-to-back Super Bowls or, it was like every other year. They were a really good football team. And the town was going crazy over the Skins, so they sent out letters to the last known residents of 500 fugitives in the area that were all wanted within D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, and saying that you have the right to come down to win Super Bowl tickets at it was Super Bowl and season tickets for the Washington Redskins. And that if you'll come down, bring proper ID, show that it's you, you can win these tickets. So they dressed up in cheerleaders. We had the mascots from the Washington Redskins out there. The head of it, which was my boss, the chief of the enforcement division, was in a tux. And, so they had all this going on. People would come in. Over 100 and something people came in, showed their ID. They're all wanting, showed their ID, and they said, oh, great. Go into the back, sit down, and we'll get you all comfortable. And a female deputy would escort them in the back, all dressed up, and said, yeah. And as soon as they sat down and said, we'll come back to you. After we got everybody in and realized that's it, 100-something people back there, then the SWAT team and the Special Operations Group jumped out, took them all down, put them on the ground, and arrested them. And one of them, I remember, said, well, that's false advertising. You can't do that.
You cheated us.
You cheated us.
I remember another one you talk about there, the similar response where they were going to take them to Atlantic City. They promised them a roll of quarters to go gamble on, and then when they were taken down, they said, "But do I still get my quarters?" That's right.
I mean, it's amazing that what they think about at the time. And, they've been in and out of the system so many times that what's important to them was what I was going to get free.
Well, what's the longest pursuit that you know of, where it took 10 or 12 years to get somebody?
Well, there's one now, still open
going.
Case that I probably worked on for 15, 20 years. You might have heard of it. It's the Alcatraz escape case.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so the two Englands and Frank Morris, they're still, nobody's ever found them. It's still an open case in the Marshals Service. You'll keep it open until something determines to close it. But they're so old now that we don't even know if they're alive. But you do have cases.
But what's your feeling about that? That's a very, very important case, and people, the common man debates that all the time. Do you think they made it, or are they just drowned out there and that little boat washed up?
Yeah, I have a hard time. I went back through everything. I went out to San Francisco, went through everything. the Bureau had the case for about 18 years before we got it. I went through all of their stuff with the Marshal's office in San Francisco. It's like 50-50 on whether they could. It was incredible what they did and how they put it together. It makes you think, surely they made it, and that a boat came and picked them up. And, where the raft was found and all that. The one thing I could never figure out is that I tracked down most of the angling family. I went after them, trying to figure that out, because there was two brothers. I figured somebody's going to slip up somewhere. I located so many members of the angling family and just never got anything. I found they were in small towns in Georgia and Alabama, and there were some in Florida. And so we checked with the post office. Usually the old town, small town, postmaster knows everybody. He said never got birthday cards or postcards or cards from foreign countries. I found other people, law enforcement, and just nobody, just total mystery. And I don't know. And I used to tell the family, after all this time, let's just tell their story. Let's figure it. Nobody gave anything.
And what about the Morris side?
The Moors, I did not. Another one, because he wasn't from my area. At the time, I was in North Florida, in Tallahassee, Florida.
I see.
He wasn't, but we could. Basically, it was the same thing, and he did not have an extended family, so there wasn't as much to look at on that side of the family. Well,
you got to admire the ingenuity of that escape.
It's incredible. I mean, it really, what an incredible. And there's one movie out there that really depicts it well, that had what they all went through and how they did it, and which just always makes you think, surely they got away, but you just don't know.
Well, what movie do you think depicts it best? The one with Clint Eastwood?
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that was probably the closest, having examined the evidence and everything out there.
I remember seeing a movie about that when I was about 8 years old. I think it was a made-for-TV movie, but it certainly held me spellbound.
Oh, absolutely. So, and there's a lot that, we've chased people 15 years later, and all of a sudden, something turns up, just a piece of evidence you didn't have before. There's one story in the book about Hampton. He's a guy that killed some people in the Washington, D.C. area, was in a mental institution called St. Elizabeth, orders a guard and takes off, and, he's in the wind. Marshals didn't have a case at that time, but like 14 years later, they picked it up and did a check of fingerprints, which had not been done nationwide, offline search, and found him up in Oregon, and actually went up that many years later under another name. And, he changed his alias. He'd been arrested like 5-6 times during that spree, but they didn't match up the fingerprints, so eventually got him, Bill.
So you just have to learn to be really patient.
Yeah, it's persistence. You've got to stay with it. Like you said earlier, the determination of the Old West, same thing today.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today. This is just a wonderful read. I put up a review on Amazon, and I said on that review of your book that it's like riding along with the US Marshals for a while, and you get very close to the action. Just a beautiful set of stories, so I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you for having me on.
The book again is US Marshals by Mike Earp. It is #1 on Amazon under law enforcement. It's a wonderful read. It is absolutely, as I said, like riding along with the U.S. Marshals, just chock full of great story after great story. Some of them will stand the hair on your neck, and some of them will just make you laugh till you cry. For Good Books Radio, I'm Dr. W.F. Strong. Have a good day.